Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this evening's webinar, Skin Deep, unveiling insights from leading dermatologists on the FDA's first skin cancer detection device, DermaSensor. My name is Jacqueline Barberina. I am the Senior Marketing Director here at DermaSensor, and I am so excited to present Dr. Zeitouni, who will be speaking tonight. Dr. Zeitouni is a highly accomplished Mohs and reconstructive surgeon. She has held many academic leadership positions and is currently in a private practice in Phoenix, Arizona. She is an investigator on many clinical trials and has received numerous grants, published over 100 previewed manuscripts, book chapters, and is the co-editor of a textbook, Dermatology and Solid Organ Transplantation. Dr. Zeitouni continues to give national and international presentations. She's previously served on the board of directors for the American Colleges of Mohs Surgery and International Society of Dermatologic Surgery. We also have today our moderator, Dr. Jessica Shepard. Dr. Jessica Shepard is a renowned gynecologist and a regular contributor on CBS. She is also voted one of Dallas's best doctors. She's a board-certified OBGYN, a fellowship-trained minimal invasive surgeon, and a women's health media expert. Dr. Shepard has completed her formal training in the Institute for Functional Medicine, expanding her knowledge and her abilities to care for a diverse patient population. We also have Larry Anderson, our Chief Commercial Officer here at DermaSensor. Larry is a West Point graduate with 20 years experience in the medical device industry, specializing in building strong teams and launching disruptive technologies. Most recently, Larry led his sales team at Accessa Health to a successful exit to Hologic during the COVID-19 pandemic. And lastly, we have Dr. Karen Chatha. Dr. Karen Chatha is an associate medical director here at DermaSensor, and Dr. Chatha is an experienced physician with a demonstrated history of working in medical device industry across multiple roles. She is skilled in clinical regulatory work for MDR submissions, research for medical devices, and medical affairs. Strong research professional, graduated her master's from the University of Liverpool. I want to welcome all of our panelists to this discussion, and I want to thank everyone for participating today. Dr. Zeitouni, it's all yours.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Jackie, for those lovely introductions. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon or this evening. And thank you to the whole DermaSensor team for organizing this webinar. So in terms of the agenda for this afternoon, we're first going to start by discussing some of the challenges or reviewing some of the challenges in skin cancer detection. And then we're going to discuss the DermaSensor and some of the unique features of the DermaSensor. And then I'm going to be presenting some new data that supports the use of the DermaSensor in clinical practice. And then at the end, we'll do a Q&A session and open it up for discussion as well. So just as a background, we all know that skin cancer is a significant public health concern. Skin cancer is the most common cancer, so therefore the prevalence of skin cancer is very high. It's estimated that 1 in 5 Americans will develop skin cancer by the age of 70. Now, not only is the prevalence high, we know that the incidence of skin cancer is also high and increasing. And melanoma has increased, the incidence of melanoma has increased by 44% over the last decade. So clearly, skin cancer detection, early diagnosis is really key to have good outcomes. But we also recognize that referring patients to dermatologists can sometimes be a little bit difficult. There may be a waiting time. There may be not enough dermatologists or specialists in the area. So clearly, we need a way to improve the evaluation of skin lesions by physicians, non-dermatologists, and also improve the efficiency of the whole screening or the whole streamlining the process of referrals from PCPs to dermatologists who have for patients that have high-risk lesions. So currently, when we look at skin cancer detection or screening and skin lesion evaluation, how is it done? Well, it's primarily done by visual examination. So the patient comes in, there's a history and physical, and then, kind of examination, visual examination of that lesion. And there, the lesion, if it's a pigmented lesion, you can use that ABCD criteria as well. In addition, there's the dermatoscope. But again, here we recognize that there's a certain learning curve to using the dermatoscope. And it's estimated that less than 10% of PCPs actually use the dermatoscope on a regular basis. So how can we improve that evaluation of lesions that are potentially for skin cancer lesions? And this is where the DermaSensor comes in. So the DermaSensor is also a skin cancer detection tool. It's non-invasive. It's used at the point of care, so right there where the patient is. But one of the advantages really of the DermaSensor is it's simple and easy to use. So when a patient comes in, has a certain lesion, the provider will place the device tip on the lesion, and then the device will scan the lesion. So there's going to be this light that scatters throughout the lesion and captures some of the abnormal features of the given lesion. The light is then transmitted back to the device, and there the device can then compare that scan to thousands of other scans that have previously been done. So one of the key features here of the DermaSensor is it is an AI, artificial intelligence device that compares the scan there of the given lesion to thousands of other scans, and then gives a certain output. And you get that immediate output. And this is it's done using a machine learning algorithm. So you get that immediate result right there, and then it takes about 20 to 25 seconds to get that result. And we'll come back in a couple of slides of what that result looks like. All right, so some of you may already know that the DermaSensor was FDA approved earlier this year. It was approved in January of 2024, but the DermaSensor has a long time in the making. Way back in 1994, one of the key technology or one of the key features of the DermaSensor is that elastic scattering spectroscopy. And this was developed again in 1994. And since then, there's been hundreds of publications on elastic scattering spectroscopy. And there's been over 30 publications on the use of it in clinical studies to classify various cancers. And then since 2018, which is the current commercial device that we have, there's been 15 clinical studies that have been done. And again, the FDA has cleared the DermaSensor in 2024, earlier this year, based on the results of 8 of the clinical studies. Now, in terms of the intended use of the DermaSensor is indicated for use to evaluate skin lesions suggestive of either melanoma, basal cell carcinoma, or squamous cell carcinoma in patients that are over the age of 40. It shouldn't really be used as a sole criteria for diagnosis of skin cancer. Its real use is to be used in combination or in conjunction with kind of the totality of the clinical information that the physician gets. And and the way the FDA approved it was it's to be used by trained physicians who are not expert in skin lesion assessment, so by non-dermatologists. And again, this is how the FDA approved the device earlier this year, based on these criteria. And again, this is the intended use of the DermaSensor. Okay, now I mentioned the device outputs. There's two main outputs, or two outputs. And either the result that you get is either on the right-hand side, it'll be for monitor, which is a negative result. And that just simply means that the scanning of the lesion and some of the features of the lesion are most likely compatible, or likelihood of this being a benign lesion. So that's the monitor. On the other side, so you either get a monitor as one of the device outputs, or you get an investigate further, and this is considered a positive result. And in the investigate further, it's accompanied by a 1 to 10 spectral score, and that indicates the degree of similarity to a malignant lesion. And obviously, the higher the score, the more likely it is to be similar to a malignant lesion. So again, there's the two device outputs you get. You get a monitor or investigate further with a score of 1 to 10. Okay, now in terms of the probe tip placement, and this is really important. So you have the device, and then you hold 90-degree angle, and it requires 5 recordings to be made for each lesion on 5 different points within the lesion border. And of course, you want to, as the photograph there is shown, you want to include like kind of the center of the lesion. If there's any areas within that lesion that is, you deem to be more concerning or more suspicious, you definitely want to be able to get that area as well. And you want to avoid recording or placing the tip, really outside of the border of the lesion or any area that may be crested or scaly area. Again, shown on the figure 11. And then if you have a lesion that's very small, you can then place the tip over it and then kind of just back it up a little bit and then place it again for that total of those 5 recordings that we're interested in. Okay, now in terms of the workflow, this just simply shows a possible workflow here. So in the first step, of course, the patient comes in and gets either full or partial, full body skin exam. And then as a second step, the physician uses the device on any of the lesions that they're unsure whether it needs further evaluation or not. And then the third step is that the DermaSensor scan provides the result, again, monitor or investigate further. And again, that comes up in about 20 to 25 seconds per lesion. And then in the fourth step, that's when the discussion really happens with the patient. Either, this is a lesion that's most likely benign, we can monitor it, we can keep an eye on, or maybe this is an investigate further result. And at that point, we need to make that decision to refer the patient to dermatology or biopsy the lesion. All right, so this is kind of the workflow. And then on this slide, what we're looking at here are the results of the Derm-Success study, which was a pivotal study that was published a little earlier. And so on the left-hand side, we're looking at the device results. Again, those 2 different outputs, in green, the monitor, or in gray, that investigate further with that scale of 1 to 10. And then you have on the second row, you have the likelihood of malignancy. And then way at the end, you have the result frequency. And this was a study that was based on over 1,500 lesions that were meant to be biopsy. So if we look at again, for the monitor, the result frequency, how many, of these lesions came back as a monitor, it was 18%. And of those, 3% of those, the likelihood of malignancy was 3%. So pretty low. And again, these are the lesions that you may want to keep an eye on and just monitor. And then you get all the other results to investigate further. And as you go along, if you look at the last row there, the investigate further 8 to 10. So the result frequency was 16%. So not many of the lesions came in, had that score, but the likelihood of malignancy was 40%. So 40% high likelihood that this is indeed, a skin cancer. And these are the patients who should be referred and should be seen sooner than later in dermatology. Right. And then, so here's the new data that we're talking about. So we wanted to share some of this new data on the DermaSensor. And this is a manuscript that was published earlier this year in the Journal of the American Board of Family Medicine. And the goal of this study was to evaluate whether the DermaSensor can be a valuable and accurate tool for primary care or PCPs to assess lesions that are concerning to the patients. So the patients have concern. Patients are coming in for these lesions. And we know that about half of melanomas that are diagnosed, they're first noticed by the patient or by the patient family. So evaluating these lesions of concern is really like a vital part of the practice. So in terms of the design of this study, this was done as a single site study over 16 weeks. And there were 3 PCPs that evaluated the lesions. Patients would come in with a lesion of concern, and then PCP would examine, maybe take pictures, and then kind of, render their diagnosis, their suspected diagnosis. The lesions would then be scanned with a DermaSensor, and both the patient and the investigator were blind to those results. And then the lesions that the PCP were considered, high risk, those lesions were sent for biopsies, so there were biopsies, and the other ones that were for monitor, those lesions were sent to be evaluated, the photographs and the images were sent to a panel of dermatology experts for review. And the primary outcome really of the study was the performance of the DermaSensor. And so on the next slide here, we see, sorry, I said 16 weeks, it's 6 weeks. So on the results, there was 155 patients. They were enrolled over 6 weeks, not 16, with a total of 178 lesions. And over 90% of these reported a new or changing lesions. When we looked at the device sensitivity, the sensitivity of the device either compared to the biopsy results or to that expert panel assessment was 90%. And this was a lot higher than the PCP evaluation or sensitivity on its own. When we looked at the specificity, it was 60%. And then when we looked at the specificity of pigmented lesion, it was 77%. When we looked at the negative predictive value, it was actually very high, and this is a measure of how accurate the device is. So if the negative predictive value is high, it means that the lesion, it's a negative result. So it means that it's a true negative. So device, and again, that was very high. So overall, when we look at these results, and the take-home message here is that the DermaSensor is shown to improve kind of the evaluation, or can improve the evaluation of PCPs of lesions that are of concern to the patient, or patient concerning lesions overall. All right, and then here's look at just there's 4 case studies that we wanted to present from some of the studies or examples from some of the studies using the DermaSensor. So on the first example there, this is a female that came, 43-year-old female that presented, didn't have any risk factor for skin cancer, but presented with this new or changing lesion. And so when the DermaSensor was utilized in terms of the results, it came back as an investigate further. So, and then, so what did the patient have? So the patient had a basal cell carcinoma. So that, this is the patient where you get that result, you get the investigate further, you look again at some of the other, features, clinical features, and you look at kind of the history of the patient. And this is a patient then you would consider referring to dermatology. The next example is a female, age 54. In terms of risk factors, she had a family history of skin cancer. She was fair and had previous nevi or dysplastic nevi, and here had a new or changing lesion that was on the head, was on the face. And using the DermaSensor in terms of the output, what you get is we monitor that lesion. When the lesion was biopsied, it was shown to be a seborrheic keratosis. So this is a lesion, again, coming back as a monitor, taking everything else into consideration that, could be easily followed, and, patient can be reassured it's most likely a benign lesion, does not need to be referred out. And then here's another example, again, on the left-hand side, a male, 57-year-old male who had previous, in terms of risk factors, had previously had sun exposure or tanning bed exposure, and came in, had a new or changing lesion. This is on his sun trunk or upper back. And so using the DermaSensor, what we saw was an investigate further on scale on that spectral score of 3. And the lesion was indeed a melanoma. So again, this is a lesion taking everything into account and that investigate further. 3, this is a patient who would need to be referred sooner than later to dermatology. And then the last example is a female, 87-year-old white female, who also had a history of sun exposure. She was fair. She had a newer changing lesion. This appears to be the scalp. And in terms of the results of the DermaSensor, it came back as an investigative further with a result of an 8, and the patient had a squamous cell carcinoma. So again, this is a patient that should be referred to dermatology for further management. So those are the 4 cases that we wanted to present. And so, we're going to move on to the question and answer period. But just in summary, again, we know there's a lot of skin cancer patients, developing. There's a higher incidence of skin cancer, and patients are becoming also more savvy in terms of themselves, in terms of looking at their skin. They see the ads, and so they're coming in more to be evaluated for certain lesions. And here we have the DermaSensor that can help, physicians kind of triage patients that, hey, we can manage these, we can monitor these, they don't need to be referred, versus the lesions that need to be referred to dermatology. They're more high risk. There's more high risk that these lesions are skin cancer and they need to be managed further into and referred to dermatology. So we're gonna now take some questions from the audience or anybody else.
Yes.
I'm on here. It's Dr. Shepard. Thanks everyone for your patience. My kids hijacked the internet, so I'm using my phone. But no, thanks so much for the presentation. And I'm glad that I've actually been able to use the device in my practice. And I think, even from, we were discussing this earlier today, is really the importance of being able to find that conduit between the PCP and the expert. And, quite frankly, when you think of skin cancer rates, which obviously you went through before, but 1 in 5 Americans will have skin cancer by the age of 70. And it is the most common cancer in the US. So obviously there's a gap somewhere, whether it's we need to train more dermatologists, healthcare system, and getting access to specialists when we think of payers and insurance. But just from, for me as a gynecologist, obviously I see a lot of women and I see them outside of just their normal well woman exams. But in that well woman exam, you develop a relationship with the patient over the years, and that's a perfect time to actually talk about those features of potential skin cancer and starting at least with initial screening. So for me, it was a no-brainer for something that is easy as a device and how it's used. And also as, a person of color, I have patients who sometimes may get missed, whether that's an access or resource. But again, skin cancers don't always look the same in people of color. So I think that this is a easy way to take away some of the barriers from a physician standpoint or healthcare provider in getting patients at least some answer that can reassure both myself and then the patient as well, and figure out when to triage them to the next level. And then you can actually decrease the gap in patients that actually need someone to look at them. I'll give one example here before we get to questions. How we've integrated it into our practice actually is when we advocate for people to come in for their well woman visit, is we actually say, and for this amount, this very small amount, you can get a skincare check. And that alone heightens people's awareness to, oh, that's my well woman. And obviously this is going to be something that's brought into the exam. One thing less for them to have to do or have to make an appointment or have to think about, and integrating it into our practice that way has actually made it much better. And then because we have aesthetics in our practice, when people are getting facials, when they're getting any, neurotoxins or fillers or any lasers, this is another way to heighten the experience by allowing them to take on a form of self-care with healthcare by using the device. So that's how we've integrated it into our practice. But I think, again, utilizing something that decreases the actual gap of patients getting care. So now we can actually go to some of the questions here. But the first one is a question that says, can you indicate rough figures for sensitivity and specificity of the actual device?
Dr. Chatha.
Can you hear me okay?
Now I
Yeah,
can.
we can hear you.
The sensitivity of the device ranges from about 90–95% depending on which study we're looking at. The specificity varies based on the pre-selected, the lesion selection criteria. So if they're physician-selected lesions that are pre-selected for biopsy, the specificity is a bit lower, it's 21%. For lesions that are of concern for melanoma, it was 35%. And for lesions of lesion concern, it's really about that 50% and 77% for pigmentation.
I didn't really hear you that well, Dr. Chatha. Are you in a spot where you can't answer the question, or is Cody around, Jacqueline?
I can chime in. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can hear you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Great, sure. Across the early effectiveness studies and the main validation studies that were submitted to FDA, the sensitivity in all those studies range between 90 to 97%. The two large validation studies were actually both 96%, one for melanoma and the other across all skin cancer types. And what Dr. Chatha was describing was the range of specificity, how it really depends on kind of the lesion selection. For lesions pre-selected for biopsy and the two large validation studies, the specificity ranged from 21 to 33%. So those were all lesions that the doctor had already identified as meriting additional evaluation. In that case, being biopsied. So the device was basically able to classify or rule out 21 to 33% of those biopsy lesions while detecting 96% of malignancies in both of those studies. For the study that Dr. Zeitouni just presented on, called Patient Select, where she was an investigator, the specificity was 61% across all lesions, and it was 77% for pigmented lesions, because it's much easier for the device to classify lesions that patients identify as benign as being benign correctly versus lesions that physicians deem meriting biopsy, because obviously the clinical involvement or atypia in a lesion that a physician deems as meriting biopsy is higher, more severe than a typical lesion that a patient identifies.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you. I have another question here. Given that one of your examples was investigating 3, I think this is how this is being stated, and ended up being a melanoma. So now with that type of diagnosis, is the recommendation to either biopsy or refer to derm with all levels to investigate all levels? That's actually a really good question, and one that I've heard of often. I think for me, and I'll just answer on my knowledge base and my comfort level with that, that for me is something that I would definitely refer to derm, just because in my wheelhouse. But again, you have people who, based on their expertise, may feel differently on what they would want to do. I don't know if there's any strong recommendations that could be answered, but I think that's one of the things that the device is able to help you either investigate further or be a negative, which is how the responses are given to you. And so in the wheelhouse of what your expertise is, I think that needs to be looked at very carefully, because we want to make sure that nothing is missed in that diagnosis as well. But if someone else wanted to chime in with that, that would be great.
So, Dr. Shepard, I totally agree, and I think it's very well said with, in terms of, the physician's own expertise or feeling of how confident they are. Should we investigate? I think the question is, should we investigate anything that's, says investigate further, or should we refer everything versus, kind of the lower numbers, meaning less, more, maybe they can monitor or send for a referral or biopsy. And I think a lot of it has to do with, again, this is the results of the DermaSensor, but it should be used in conjunction with, again, history, physical, everything else, and then, their own assessment and their own evaluation of the lesion. So if there is any concern, they feel like, okay, it comes back at 3, but I really feel like this could be a melanoma, then they should go ahead and absolutely refer. So do all lesions, with a 3 or a 2 need to be referred? And again, it's taken into the context of the whole patient and everything else, and their own comfort level of what, and their own suspicion of how,
Yeah.
the risk of this being a skin cancer or not. And I don't think any dermatologist on the other, sitting as on the dermatology side, if, a lesion is investigated further is even a 1, but, the PCP said, hey, look, I'm concerned about this lesion. We're going to see these lesions, so.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can go into expertise. Maybe how much they've seen in their own practice, that can be something as well. And again, that goes to the device itself. Now, integrating that into the practice requires, like, what have I seen in the past, or what was I even willing to discuss with my patients prior? For me, that was out of my wheelhouse. But now with the device, I actually feel more well equipped to start the conversation, knowing well that if I do have something that comes up with investigate further to a certain number, that at that point I'm like, this is great. It's taken it off my, the table of something that I wouldn't even know to discuss or what to even say in response. Now to get them to the provider that they need to get, I think that's for me what creates or takes away a lot of the barriers. And again, the time frame in how patients get diagnosed, because a lot of times a patient may not say something, it changes in color or diameter, and then you have a real big problem. And with any cancer, early detection is key. So that is, again, how we've integrated it in our actual practice. So we have some more questions coming in. Do you charge for this service for cash paying patients in the aesthetic setting? And if so, what is the charge? Again, I can give my personal experience and anyone can chime in as well. Yeah, charging for the service for cash paying patients, absolutely. My practice is set up specifically where it's all cash, so we set that in. We actually, because we just started using it, we had to find a way that would be something that we would want all patients to be able to access, and so the price for us couldn't be that high, but also we wanted to be able to have them get the cost, I guess, benefit of what they were paying for in being able to know something that could either make them feel more reassured, and then also in the area that you live, or where your practice is set up, can also determine how much you would charge for cash paying patients. And so if I can remember, I think I quoted 75 before, but it might be 150. I can't quite remember, because once we got the device about 3 months ago, we sat down and figured out what that cost would be. And I think it's somewhere in there, if I'm not mistaken. But if anyone else wants to chime in about charge and cash paying patients or non-cash paying patients.
Is that the billing question that I should probably go into right now? So as the manufacturer, obviously we cannot dictate how a physician bills, but what we can on the manufacturer side is tell you that we've gotten guidance or received guidance from the past president of AAD, who's on the coding committee, so Dr. Dan Siegel. And there's a few different ways that we've seen our physician partners billing. The first one is standard E&M billing. Everybody's used to it. The second way is for annual wellness visits that Dr. Shepard alluded to earlier. For a well woman's visit, since skin cancer checks are not covered, you could always use a modifier 2.5 and bill an additional level 3 or level 4. The third way is a miscellaneous code. So if that's the information that you would like, Jacqueline could get that information from you and we can send you a coding guidance sheet. But again, as the manufacturer, we can't tell you how to bill. We can provide you the information that's been provided to us by the subject matter experts.
Thanks, Larry. And if you are interested in learning more, please just send me an email or put your email in the chat box, and we will follow up with you directly. Thank you.
Any other questions, Jacqueline?
I think there was a couple of more, right, Dr. Shepard?
Yes, there's one that says, do you intend to market the device in Europe? at a later stage? And if yes, when? Good question.
The answer is yes. And I can't give you an exact date, but the best way to phrase that is once we figure out as an organization how to best support the physicians in the US and we figured out, our manufacturing and distribution, then that's when I'll consider going to Europe. We're in a pretty good position right now. And again, we're planning on expanding the number of states where we are currently in. That's why we're having this discussion today. I don't have an exact date, but to answer the question, I am looking at overseas right now, but I don't have a specific date. I'm sorry.
We won't hold that against you, that date.
Okay.
All right. We have another question. Any studies with abnormally non-pigmented lesions, i.e. detecting a amelanotic melanoma?
Cody, if you're on it, Dr. Chath, I don't know if you have good signal. I can't really understand you.
Doctor, I can take it. Yeah,
Thank you.
there's I think the pivotal study there was for non-pigmented melanomas. So it's there have been some so far, they've all been detected, but the sample sizes are quite small, as everyone's aware. The prevalence is quite low. So the device indication is for the 3 common skin cancer types: melanoma, BCCs, and SCCs. There have been, across all the studies, maybe a dozen or so of the rarer skin cancer types picked up, like amelanotic melanomas, but that is not the intended use.
Great. I have a two-part question here. I would love to get the coding data, which we can get you that. And we have the email here, which I can pass on to the group. And then how are we able to order the device?
Great. So the device, one of your local area sales directors, there's 2 of them, one on the east and one on the west. You also have myself or Ruth. So if you'd like to either order the device right now, you can do so. We can send you a link, or if you'd like to speak to one of our directors, Jacqueline can arrange that. And I'll just go ahead and answer this because I'm sure the questions on everybody's mind is how much is the device? So I thought early on we would sell the device for $20,000, but I quickly realized that that's just wasn't going to happen. So what we decided to do was make the device as accessible as possible, even if you're in a rural location or a larger urban location. So what we did is for the first 3 months, the device for unlimited users and unlimited patient scans is $199 a month. We normally have an activation fee for $199. We're waiving that for the foreseeable future. After 3 months, you can return the device or you can keep it. If you decide to keep the device, there's 2 options that are available right now. The first one is you can pay $399 per month, month to month. Or the second option is you say, I love DermaSensor so much, I want it for another full year. You can pay 9 months upfront and keep it for 12 months, which will effectively bring the cost of the device down to $299 a month. What's important to note is that for any option that you choose, whether it's the full year or month to month, after 3 months, at any time, if you are dissatisfied with either the workflow or how the device is working in your practice, you can return it with no questions asked. Well, there's going to be questions asked, but with no penalty. There won't be a restocking fee. There's no additional taxes. Even at 12 months, if you say, I just don't want the device anymore, we will take it back. And if you do decide to do the annual option, where you say, I want to pay for 12 months up front or 9 months up front to receive 12, if you use it for 4 months, and you will send it back, we'll refund you for the remaining time that's left on the device. So we really tried to make it, remove all the barriers to entry. So we hope that that price point will be to your liking.
Thanks, Larry. And I'd just like to add that this is our year-end special that we're having, and you could go to our website, DermaSensor.com. If you'd like to even order the device this evening, we do have our e-commerce is up, so you could order directly on our website.
Great. Well, I think that kind of wraps up the questions. Thanks, Larry, for getting those cost in there. But again, if you want any more information, please feel free to reach out. And we hope that this discussion can continue and we can have further discussions. So thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate your time. And I hope that it answered your questions and that it intrigues you to order the device and integrate it into your practice. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
Thank you all so much.